Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here today with Lloyd Manchester, and Lloyd is just going to bring up his little bit about him here. He is the head and founder of the West Kelowna branch of the Kelowna Citizens Safety Association. And here's a little bit about his background. In 1980, Lloyd moved to Kelowna with his young family. One night they were sprayed with malathion, which was the purpose of that is to kill mosquitoes. When he inquired about the application, he asked about having a pool in the front yard for his young children. He was told to empty it because the pesticide becomes more toxic in water. Not exactly a reassuring remark. Lloyd asked for his family to be notified of these applications in the future, and the regional district refused. After looking at the permit, Lloyd laid 5 charges under the BC Pesticide Control Act. The regional district pled guilty and was placed on probation, had a surety bond enforced on them, and never sprayed malathion again. That's a good result. The alternative BTI was implemented. After that, Lloyd formed the Canadian Earth Care Society, a multi-issue organization, and he operated for 25 years. Part of that time had offices in Vancouver, Victoria, Kamloops, and Parksville. Many battles were fought over the spraying of glyphosate, which is Roundup, in our forests, which continue to this day. A major win in the BC Court of Appeal was a judgment that supported the consideration of alternatives before pesticides would be used. Lloyd has argued and testified in numerous Environmental Appeal Board hearings over the decades, and currently he is the founder of the Kelowna Citizens Safety Association in Kelowna, which has held 2 town halls with 400 people attending, the most recent one. Lloyd presented on the various pieces of legislation recently passed in BC that take our rights and freedoms away. It's not just this pesticide stuff we're going to be talking about today, but there's other things going on that we think all the citizens of British Columbia should be aware of. Lloyd and KCSA are currently fighting the aerial spraying of a bacterial pesticide over 13 communities in BC. Spraying was to occur in Cranbrook and Kelowna last week, but has been delayed by the school districts in both communities having concerns regarding protecting students and staff from exposure. So, Lloyd, thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you for your work in protecting the health and safety of British Columbia residents and the flora and fauna of our province.
Well, thank you, Rod. Thanks for having me as well.
Yeah, it's great. And just for our viewers and listeners, I've met Lloyd, or at least been on the same Zoom calls with him through an organization called BC Rising. And I've been impressed, Lloyd, with your constant, you're in the front lines on a number of issues. Today we're going to talk about pesticides, but you've been really in many of the issues that are coming at us because of our dictatorial top-down government in British Columbia. So first of all, what is a bacterial pesticide?
Well, there's a number of different types of pesticides. Pesticides are obviously designed to kill organisms. So you have your chemical pesticides that, like malathion is an example. So it's a hydrocarbon-based pesticide. It usually acts, its mode of action is to destroy the neural impulses between the synaptic endings of in humans. A bacterial pesticide is a totally different sort of character here because it's like any bacteria that we take in our bodies. We take in thousands of bacteria every single day, and our bodies deal with it. And they deal with it based on obviously how healthy you are, how your immune system's working, and that. With a bacterial pesticide that they have sprayed already in some of the communities, the 13 communities, is that it actually inoculates into your body. So once it's in your body, you will have it in your body. And then as with any bacteria, should it mutate or should it, we just don't know exactly what it will do, but we know with this particular pesticide, it causes irritations in the respiratory system, eye irritation, And then there's long-term effects like asthma, people that have been sprayed without notice. And there's health incident reports on Health Canada's website that document all of this stuff. But yet the Ministry of Forest, who's charged with the spraying of these communities, continually says that it's safe, and this is given the fact that 87% of the formulation is not even known, and they will not release what those ingredients are. And they claim that all of these other ingredients are non-toxic, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where we're at as far as a bacterial pesticide, and it's much more dangerous in the sense that if it's contaminated, then it can cause all kinds of other effects that we don't know. So what we've got happening here in these communities that have been sprayed is no proper monitoring for health effects. And in fact, in the permit, it says that if you report a health effect to the Ministry of Forest, then they report it to the manufacturer. Now, how absurd is that? Like we've got our own interior health authority that should be taking care of this issue, when in fact the ministry is not only reporting it to the manufacturer, they're also the ones that are determining whether or not they have a violation when they spray this stuff,
Yeah.
which was reported in the first case with Tsawwassen and Langley. They sprayed when it was after it just rained. So again, it's like they're monitoring themselves. There's no accountability. There's no transparency, and they're poisoning people in these communities.
We've seen so much of that in recent years, governments monitoring themselves, taking actions that could affect the health and safety of a lot of people. In fact, we believe have affected the health and safety of a lot of people with the vaccines and other things. But this is something they're spraying. It's aerial spraying, so anyone walking around during that time would be breathing it in. That's one thing, and and the government, is just sort of saying, "Don't worry, it's safe." That doesn't give you a lot of confidence. So, what is the purpose of this particular uh, this FORAY 48B is the name of the product? What is the purpose of spraying FORAY 48B on these communities? What does the government think it's trying to accomplish?
Well, what the government is saying is that the Asian gypsy moth, which now I guess it's improper or incorrect, politically incorrect to call it a gypsy moth, which again is another absurdity. So they've called it the spongy moth. So anyway, they found 11 moths in Kelowna and West Kelowna. They found 39 moths in Cranbrook as an example, and this justifies a blanket spraying. As you mentioned earlier, in a court case with the Canadian Earth Care Society, it was shown that the judges ruled that alternatives should be considered first. And what our argument about these applications is that they can be done manually on the ground. There is no need to expose a general population and the environment to this type of pesticide. For example, even non-target species are being affected, and butterfly populations will crash for years. So they may even make them extinct as a result of these sprays. And I guess the other issue here is that the government touts it as being used as organic spray, and most organic growers will not use it. They will not do broad applications with it. There is potential contamination of the soils as a result of the use of it. So they're completely misrepresenting this whole situation, and they're using a um, a provision. I believe that the Ministry of Forest, when they negotiate tariff agreements with the United States is saying we don't want timber that's been infected with a gypsy moth, which again is absolutely stupid. But they're using that as justification for spraying. So this is actually being directed by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, who's doing the testing. And again, you can only think from the past here as to what's happened, and that is it really safe and is it effective? Well, doing a broad-based application in a large community. And most of these, again, are being done in residential areas with human populations, parks, schools, playgrounds. There's even streams running through almost all of these areas that they're spraying, and there's old age homes, there's homeless shelters. I mean, it's absolutely crazy that they're doing this in these communities. And what's happening as a result of it is the pesticide, when it gets sprayed, within 10 minutes it hits the ground. When it hits the ground, the bacterial load is extremely high, and people can be very seriously affected at that particular time. But then what happens, for example, if it's sprayed on a school, which they have been doing, then the children come to school. That pesticide is on the lawns, it's on their fields, it's on their structures handrails that they go into the school, it's on their shoes. And then they're basically infecting all the children and the staff that go into those schools with this pesticide, which what happens with pesticides is that it forms a residue and it hardens. So if it gets into air filters, air conditioning units, then what happens is the natural process of degradation occurs. And as it does, it breaks down into different metabolites, which are actually more toxic than the original pesticide itself and can cause more damage to people as far as adverse health events. And again, that's not acceptable. And what we're saying here too is that we have rules in BC called the WorkSafe BC pesticide regulations. And we've said to government quite clearly that on the one hand, as a government, you are the major employer in this province, and you have a duty to follow those regulations, which would mean that they have to come up with action plans. They have to come up with action plans that include, notifying the people in your workplace, notifying anybody that comes into your workplace, notifying them what the pesticide is, what the adverse events are associated with it, and then the proper mitigation practices or procedures that need to be implemented, such as, cleaning up the residue, washing off the play structures, and this kind of stuff. So that's not being done. They're just going ahead willy-nilly. They think that this is just okay to do this to a population that is most cases does not even know this is happening. So the way they advertise an application, for example, in West Kelowna, is that they put a sign up on the highway and they say there's going to be spraying in the next 48 hours. So, that may happen and it may not. We don't even know. But I mean, this is the way that it's considered a proper notification, which again, it's not, because we have so many people, and we've heard of cases where, this is done early in the morning. So, the early birds that get up in the morning, which is usually a lot of older people, like myself, and you get out, you hear an airplane, you go, what the heck's that airplane? Why is there an airplane so low flying over our house? And you look up, and the next thing you know, you've got pesticide in your eyes, and your eyes get infected with it. They get inoculated with it, actually, but they're infected. It causes irritation. If you take, like a lot of people, like my wife, takes drops for glaucoma, well, then what you've got is you've got a bacterial pesticide interacting with a prescription drug in your eyes. So as to what it does to your eyes, who really knows? Because they're not testing this. Interior Health has just dropped the ball. They're being notified of the permit, but again, if there's a report of an incident, it goes to the US manufacturer of this pesticide, which, as I said before, it's absolutely ludicrous for this to be happening in the 21st century over communities in this province, and being supported by a government that really doesn't care about its citizens.
Yeah. Well, we in the freedom movement have been talking, and you've been talking with many people about in this concept of informed consent. So that have to do with whatever is going to enter into your body. If we've had these vaccine mandates, and of course we believe that that's caused a lot of harm to a lot of people, deaths in some cases, and but the people did not have an opportunity for informed consent. They weren't given the true facts. They actually, some of them were forced or compelled, at least coerced into taking something into their body they didn't want. In this case, the people of West Kelowna and Cranbrook and other areas where this may be planned are not even given the opportunity to. They're not given the information. Number one, what's going on, what's about to take place, and they're not given an opportunity to say, no, we don't want that in West Kelowna. We don't want that in Cranbrook. So there's a lot wrong on that level, and if there are definite, you know, liabilities or likelihoods of harm to result in humans, that's terrible. But I'm also concerned about the insect life there. I mean, butterflies, we all enjoy seeing moths and butterflies. Yeah, certain ones we don't like as well as other ones, but monarch butterflies and other species that we enjoy, swallowtails and so on in the summer, to think that they could be wiped out in an area through this kind of Rambo style, assault on the population is incredible. So what about pollinators, honeybees and things like that, other pollinating bees?
Well, I mean, they do have effects on pollinators. Again, the government is ensures that the actual amount of studying that's being done on these populations is not adequate. So I would just say, categorically that they don't care. They're monitoring their own operations, so they're not going to tell you if they go outside of their spray zone. When they spray from an altitude like 100 feet type of thing, they're counting on the spray drift being a couple 100 meters or a few 100 feet here or there. That's absolutely a game, ludicrous. Spray of that type will go for kilometers. And for an example would be Cranbrook. Right just outside of the spray zone is a hospital, the East Kootenay Regional Hospital. So again, like we wrote a letter to the hospital, Interior Health, saying if you have this hospital here, first of all, I mean, you got a plane at 100 feet maneuvering around a hospital. If something happens, there's a potential for an accident, not only to the hospital, but to where's it going to crash in the residential area? It's spraying, like I mean, again, this is absolutely unacceptable. But even more so, if that bacteria goes into the air conditioners of that hospital, we use that as an example. It not only violates the WorkSafe provisions for that particular hospital, but it's in their air conditioner. As that caked residue continues to break down, it will continue to be circulated through the hospital. So you have people obviously in hospitals that are immunocompromised, that are sick, and then you're exposing them to a bacteria that we again, it comes from the United States. We do not know if it's been genetically modified, if it's been encoded to do certain things at the environmental fate level or soil in the soils, those kinds of things. So we have no idea about what those potential health effects are from that happening. And we have Interior Health not even monitoring it, and again, unacceptable.
Well, I see you've written a number of good letters, open letters to Premier Eby and Cabinet, also to WorkSafe BC and other organizations. Uh, Number one, alerting them of their what they should be very well aware of their potential liability if they're imposing something like this on the population, and if something goes wrong. I mean, and a lot of the things that go wrong, we know we saw this with the vaccines. There's a lot of times someone will have a symptom or an impact from something that enters into their body, and it's difficult to trace that down. What caused that? Was it just a coincidence, or is it due to this ingestion or inhalation of these pesticides, for instance? But thank you for the work you and your team have done in alerting the various authorities to their responsibility. They should be well aware of that before you have to talk to them about it. Um, what's been the response from Premier Eby, for instance, and from some of these other organizations?
Well, the response has been definite silence. There has been no response from these from the government agencies, with the exception of the Cranbrook School District number 5 actually issued a notice in their newsletter that they were going to take some of the precautions, which is to usher students into the school with in the buses directly into the school, to clean the floors of the school off, for them to remove their shoes, some of these types of things. But again, for example, in West Kelowna, we have the Constable Neil Bruce Middle School right in the epicenter of the application. I mean, it's going to be covered, all structures. Even if you did what Cranbrook's trying to do, you would not protect the children from being exposed to this pesticide. That school needs to be canceled, basically, and they need to clean up the residue as per the regulations prior to allowing any students back in. And it's not just the students in schools. I mean, Cranbrook, again, is another example where there's probably 12 or 14 daycare centers within this residential area. There's a park, there's old age home, there's, again, old age homes. You got, these big filters on the tops of these buildings, and they're going to be hauling all of this pesticide drift in, and it's going to be breaking down over time. And again, this is not acceptable. But when you talk about informed consent, let's just take a real look at that, and what we have with our present government. And what I'd say we have is, as you mentioned earlier, we have mandates still in place, only province jurisdiction in the entire world that has this. We have, still COVID protocols in place for, and again, this is a flu virus, this is a coronavirus. They degrade in time. It's been long gone. It's long, long gone. Its degradation process means that, even as I spoke about the metabolites that break down, as they break down, they continue to get weaker and weaker, and therefore, become, not a problem after that degradation process occurs. But when we've got a government that is basically, I would say, governing by ideology, because who are they working for? They're not working for the people, because what's happening with respect to the informed consent, Stephen, with the vaccinations, is that they're not informing people of, say, for example, the 1,291 adverse events that Pfizer released, what was forced to release by the courts. They're not telling people about those. They're not telling doctors about those. So it's like, an example would be when you go to get a prescription or you fill a prescription at the pharmacy, then you get a couple pages there, and it has all the different side effects with respect to that medication, and medications you shouldn't use with it and that. But what do you get with the vaccine? You don't get anything. And further to that is that we're still in a position where these mandates are affecting all of our young children that are going to university. You cannot go to university if you don't have the shot. You got to have 2 shots and the booster. And we know that if you take the booster, the potential for harm is even higher. And I mean, I got to tell you that I'm, in my own family, and I'm allowed to release this information, but my niece had to take, she's a young woman, had to support her young kids, forced to take the shot after her second shot, and shortly after, sitting in a car, her veins turn black, her heart starts racing, ends up in the hospital. She now has pericarditis. So it's clear that these shots have an effect, and we need to be, have informed consent, just like with the pesticides, and we need a government that is actually saying, well, we need to help people. We really need to help these people, and we're not going to conduct activities that are potentially going to harm people without their knowledge. I mean, again, government should not be allowed to rule, whether it's in a province or in a country, anywhere where they're instituting these types of directives that are whether they're coming from the World Health Organization or other bodies such as Bill 36 allows our health system's going to hell in a handbasket. And what are we doing about it? And we're not doing anything about it. So it's sort of like we need politicians in power to actually start representing their public and not representing these whacked out ideologies that don't really make any sense. And they're not protecting people in the province. And that, again, is a total lack of disregard for the stature of their office and what they swore to do, which is protect and be accountable to the public of this province.
Yeah, their loyalties go not only to ideologies, but to these huge corporate entities, whether it was Pfizer or the company that manufactures this bacterial pesticide. Um, anyway, Lloyd, I want to thank you for the work you're doing. Please keep up your good work. Thank you for informing me more about this, as well as our viewers and listeners today. I want to tell folks if they want to follow this and learn a little bit more about it, they can go to KelownaCSA.org. KelownaCSA.org. Is there are there other places where they should be contacting or viewing the information, Lloyd?
From our website, you can find out pretty well what's going on everywhere. But I'd also recommend that you use the 1-800 number for the BC government, 1-800-663-7867, and call the Minister of Forests, Minister Ralston, and Premier Eby. That's a free phone call. Give them a call and tell them that you're not in favor of what they're doing with respect to this pesticide application in communities and voice their opposition. The only way that we're going to get, like reasonableness back into our government is for people to activate. And it's common. What can I do about this? I'm not in agreement with it. Well, you have to phone your politicians, just like I phoned you, Rod. I phoned you and said, "Here's what's happening. What do you think about it?" And they have to be receptive to that happening. But you phone up some of the government people, they won't even talk to you. You know. And again, we need to change that. But changing it means two things. One is acting on it, and then the other one is thinking about what world do we really want to have in the future. We want a world that has, people in it that think from their hearts and they act from their hearts, and they have compassion, they have honor, they have empathy, they have love for everybody else, and they should respect everybody else and treat them the way that we should be treated, with which is respect, with honor for being here, and not be treated as if we're not even, they don't even want us here, basically, or they don't care about what we're doing. So there is an ability to change, and one of them is through how people vote, and the other one is through taking action and making people aware of your concerns, and the other one is thinking about what you want to see in this world, which is a better place, and to feel it and to make it happen. And that way we will change the world as it is, and to a better world where we have, you know, respect and honor throughout our entire population.
Well, very good. And it resonates with, for Christian, that the concept, Jesus told us to pray that God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we see today that's not the case. With all kinds of corruption and greed and people not caring about others. But we need to, as you say, in our own lives, in our communities, and in every way we can, seek to treat others the way we'd like them to be treated. And so I want to assure you and our listeners that myself, I, as the leader of the Christian Heritage Party of British Columbia, and as a candidate in the upcoming election, will do what I can to turn this aerial spraying off, because I think it's just not fair to our citizens. It's not fair to the flora and fauna of this province. And I'm also concerned, just throwing this at one last bit, not only is it hard on the bugs, but there's a lot of birds that depend on those insects, and we can't just willy-nilly exterminate all kinds of insect life and expect that our bird life is going to stay the same. So these things are important. They're a legacy for our children and grandchildren, and we need to protect them and be a little more careful than we have been about the wanton use of chemicals to solve problems like this.
Exactly. Totally agree there, Rod.
Thanks very much. Lloyd Manchester from Kelowna, West Kelowna. Thank you for joining us today, and keep up your good work, and we'll be watching to see how this government responds, because it needs to respond to these very serious concerns.
Thank you very much, and we'll keep you updated.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.